Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I think we'll go ahead and get started for today. Appreciate everyone joining us on these calls every month. Have a handful of updates to give everyone today, but hopefully it's a little bit more of an open discussion as usual. So again, just thank everyone for spending a little bit of their time and their busy weeks with us to hear some updates on tribal housing issues and particularly kind of updates for the new Congress going on in Washington. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I encourage everyone to introduce yourself or say hi in the chat feature. But at any time, if you've got questions or comments or want to jump in, just feel free to do so. It's a pretty small group today, and I think we always like when there's some collaboration and different viewpoints and discussions to have. So don't feel shy about jumping in the conversation if you've got any questions or anything you'd like to add. But with that, I'll go ahead and jump into our slide deck that we usually go through. And really just some updates on kind of this brand new Congress. As we talked about in the last call, and as most people know, Congress starts over every 2 years. So a lot of our tribal housing bills, legislation are all starting over at this point in this new Congress. So I tried to update our slides with just some of the bigger updates that we'll hear about over the call on this first slide here for folks to see. I mentioned the 118th Congress. It's been a very slow start for this Congress. I think everyone saw in the news the speaker vote back in January took a whole week. But even after that, things have kind of gone very slowly for both the House and the Senate on just organizing committees and things like that. Still getting committee rosters just late last week, early this week. On subcommittees and things like that. So still waiting to hear on even some new assignments for new members, things like that. So it's been a slow start for this Congress, as I'm sure you've all seen and heard in the news as well. We're going to talk a little bit today about our NAIHC board chairman, Thomas Lozano, joined us in DC for a full week of meetings on the Hill and with OMB. Really meeting with a bunch of new members and Republican members of financial services where our NAIHC bills flow through. So some good discussions there, a lot of supportive meetings as we get started here and reconnecting with new members and the like on the House side in particular. So as you know, a lot of our members of Congress just need to be educated and be made aware of the issues that face tribal communities and tribal housing issues in particular. So we'll sprinkle that through the call or discussions today as well. Then as for a NAIHC update, a lot of our meetings in DC were revolved around NAIHC and what that would look like this year. As all of you know by now, we didn't get NAIHC into the final package of a bill that passed at the end of last year as one of the last bills of Congress. So we're starting over with that process. So starting to identify who are good sponsors, lead sponsors, co-sponsors for these bills moving forward, and we'll go through some of the updates on what that's looking like on both the House and the Senate side here in a moment. And then we'll talk about some of the other tribal housing bills as well. I said it's a slow start, but we have already seen, I think, 2 tribal housing bills reintroduced this year. They're some of the smaller bills, although one's a pretty sizable fix to the Native American Direct Loan Program at the Veterans Affairs Department. So we'll talk a bit about that one as well. That's already been reintroduced by bipartisan co-sponsors and really the leadership of the VA Senate Committee. So we're looking to see that bill move forward pretty quickly. So we'll jump into that and talk a little bit about that bill. If anyone on the call wants to mention it, we can talk a little bit more in depth about it when we get there. But first, I'll start, kind of as we do on all of these calls, just the update on NAIHC. So here's a slide from literally the last month's call, just the wrap up from last year, the last 117th Congress. As many of you know, we were really pushing a Senate version of this bill, because it did pass the full Senate at least once in the last Congress in 2021. We had it added to a larger bill that was moving, the National Defense Authorization Bill. But we couldn't get it across the finish line, unfortunately, in the larger omnibus package that was passed right at the very end before Christmas last year. But they're a bipartisan bill, 13 bipartisan co-sponsors of that Senate version. It would have been a 10-year reauthorization, included Native Hawaiian programs, included tribal rental rule provisions at the end of the day. And this is the kind of the starting point that we're going to see probably on the Senate side, because it had such good bipartisan support and was able to get through the Senate. a lot of times the starting point is trying not to make too many changes, because then if you had full support of a bill in a prior year, you might start to lose some of that if you change too much of the bill. So that is likely the starting point on the Senate side. We'll talk about that here in a quick second. We were able to meet with both the minority and majority staff for Indian Affairs chair and ranking member or vice chair for that committee, and a lot of good feedback and support on that as we get started in this Congress. On the House side, we had the two House bills that did not really go anywhere in the House side. In the last Congress, we had the HR 5195, which was marked up and reported out of the House Financial Services Committee, but did not see any movement or traction after that. And then the larger bill there, that was just kind of a national housing policy bill that included some good NAIHC provisions, but as a Democratic kind of policy bill, wasn't really expected to go anywhere in the full Congress. So where does that lead us here coming into the new year? As I mentioned, we had the trip for the NAIHC board chair last week in DC. I think we had 15 meetings in total, met with 12 congressional offices, committee staff, Republican study committee, where we met a handful of other members of Republican caucus on the House side. And we had a meeting with OMB as well to talk about budgets and the disparities that we've been seeing in tribal housing budgets versus larger HUD budgets overall. So a great trip, a great meeting for the chair. A lot of introductions, of course, for new members and members of the House and Financial Services Committee, as we were learning the rosters of that committee. Even as we were scheduling and having those meetings, we were learning kind of new positions and chairs and things for subcommittees as we were going through those meetings in the week. So a lot of good connections met there. On the Senate side, as I mentioned, we met with both the majority and minority side for Indian Affairs. Interested in a pretty similar NAIHC bill, not a lot of changes from what we've seen in the past. Bipartisan support, you don't necessarily want to rock the boat too much. We did ask, of course, about some of the changes we would like to see based on some other provisions we've seen in the House bill and some other NAIHC efforts, like the flood insurance provisions, 184 court jurisdictions. So I think those are still, possible to be added, probably not necessarily so much in a introduced version, but as we go through the process again of marking up a bill in committee, bringing it to the floor, trying to add it to other bills where you can again adjust language to a package. There are some opportunities, I hope, to make some gains there. On the House side, we did meet with Chairman McHenry, who's the chair of the Financial Services Committee now under the Republican House control, and very supportive. We met with him directly, not just staff, so certainly always helpful and good to see when a member is that engaged, of course, at taking the meetings directly on these issues. And we know that he had spoken with Senator Schatz in the run-up to the omnibus package last year. So certainly a lot of familiarity there with NAIHC and with the needs of this program. Didn't really get any kind of firm timeframes or commitments quite yet. Every incoming majority of Congress, certainly tries to map out their first 60 or 90 days. And I'm not sure that map has gone quite to the plans that they all had, but we're trying to make sure that tribal housing fits into that at some point. We have asked that, or let them know that we're having our conference at the beginning of March in just 4 or 5 short weeks. And if they'd like to have a listening session or hearings, we'd certainly be available and have a lot of you all, as tribal housing professionals and tribal leaders in DC, to have those conversations. So as I mentioned, tons of support that we've heard from members on both sides of the aisle. No one really objecting to tribal housing issues. I think a lot of it's just trying to relearn the issues and possibly have those types of hearings or further discussions as we go. So as we were learning the rosters of the committees as well, trying to just identify who would be the lead that we would ask to introduce NAIHC version on the House side. Only a handful of members on the Financial Services Committee even have tribes in their district. So certainly targeting those offices and those members who at least have some familiarity with tribal issues. Chairman McHenry himself, including the Eastern Band as part of the district there, and he's very familiar with their program and their community. So I think there's a little bit of wait and see too from the Republican committee members. Is this going to be a chairman's bill or would he prefer a member of the committee lead that effort or not? So we're kind of working out those details. Hopefully we'll have some good updates on that by the time you all can join us next month in Washington, D.C. But as I mentioned, tons of great first kind of meetings in this Congress. A lot of folks that were already involved, of course, in NAIHC discussions in the past. So really just learning and meeting some new staff as well, and for the new members, getting them up to speed on what tribal housing issues look like for this coming year. The goal would be to get as close to a companion bill as possible in both chambers. Last Congress with the House version and the Senate version, there were quite a few differences. The House version, had some provisions that we didn't like in it, but also did have some of the extra kind of non-NAIHC specific provisions that we would love to see get included into a tribal housing package, just because it would really improve kind of federal housing programs across the board for a lot of our tribal communities. So still working on that, but the goal is usually get these bills as close as you can, so people kind of are aware of what the pitfalls are, and if one chamber can move before the other, it's really a similar version. So a lot of optimism, I think, in these first couple of meetings. I think we've talked on these calls before, split Congresses, typically not the best for big national policy issues, but for tribal issues, it's actually pretty good scenarios. We definitely have tribal champions and allies on both sides of the aisle in both chambers. So having this type of a split is pretty a good opportunity, because they see this as a place to actually, have common ground and make some compromises with one another on. So always optimistic in a new Congress, but even with a split Congress like we see and hear about in the news, I think it's still a reason for optimism on the tribal housing fund and NAIHC in particular. So we were happy with how those meetings turned out, doing a lot of follow-up this week. And certainly we'll be in touch with these offices as we get everyone of you into town coming up in March, and hopefully have some bills introduced and some timeframes to work from. And I think in the springtime, we'll see a budget as well around our conference date. So we'll talk about a budget here in a second, but some good meetings all around. Before I move on to other bills, I want to open up real quick. Any discussion on NAIHC or questions about it, about a strategy or about our process that we're working on before I move into some of the other tribal housing bills? All right.
Tony.
Yeah.
This is Francisco, Executive Director for Santa Clara Pueblo Housing Authority in New Mexico. For the NAIHC reauthorization, is any news in reference to the rulemaking committee, then it should be taking place. But because that committee has not been in place for a long time, and it has to do specifically for funding for small tribes. NAIHC, like I mentioned before in the previous meetings, NAIHC is not good for small tribes. For instance, our tribe has not been able to develop any new housing since 1998. So NAIHC doesn't do nothing to us. I'm planning to meet with all our congressional delegation in Washington, D.C., and bring them and that information, what's happening at the level of small tribes in New Mexico. New Mexico, we have just small tribes. I mean, we are not, we have 22 small tribes without the Navajo Nation. Any input in that?
Yeah, thanks, Francisco. I think when we talk to folks on the Hill and our our partners at HUD, I think a lot of the discussion around that is that they believe new negotiated rulemaking doesn't get really triggered until or unless a new NAIHC bill gets passed by Congress. I know there's some disagreement about that in the way that that's worded and interpreted in the current NAIHC statute, but I think a lot of folks are wanting to wait for a NAIHC reauthorization bill to pass to see if there's any changes that would then need to be incorporated into new rulemaking, rather than have a rulemaking get done and then maybe see a bill pass that has additional changes after that. So that's kind of the message we hear from in Washington, D.C., but I know there's a lot of disagreement about when rulemaking should actually happen based on that on NAIHC the way it's worded now, but that's kind of what we hear in Washington. Anything else? And we can keep chatting about that. I think it's a concern that everyone is aware of, that there hasn't been a rulemaking other than the funding rulemaking in a while now. So I think that's a topic that people certainly wanted to discuss, and any discussions we have with members or offices on the Hill, that's free to come up by anyone, Hillside or the tribal side. And I think it's a good point to raise if it's a big issue for your particular program. And yeah. Well, let's jump into some of the other housing bills. And as I mentioned, feel free to jump in if you've got any questions or comments or want to have specific discussions. And the other tribal housing bills that we've seen, the first one here has been reintroduced already, the Tribal Trust Land Homeownership Act. This is a bill that would really just codify the timeframes that the BIA has to process mortgage related documents regarding trust land documents in leasing and the mortgage process. This bill that we've seen in the prior Congress gets reported out of Indian Affairs Committee pretty quickly in the prior year, and was part of a tribal package that didn't get included in the final omnibus packages at the end of last year as well. But this bill has already been introduced, S70. We expect this to probably be added in the first Indian Affairs markup that we see whenever that actually happens. I don't think it's been scheduled yet. As I mentioned, a lot of them haven't been formally organized yet to really set their schedules. But this is a pretty simple bill that would really just put into statute some of the timeframes that we see BIA trying to work under now under their own handbook and not always meeting. But Gabrielle, I see you got your hand up. Oh, you're muted.
Does that include TSR and conveyances?
It is supposed to be, I think those are included specifically in the bill language, but it is meant to be kind of all encompassing for all these types of documents that are involved in the mortgage process. But I think it specifically includes TSRs for sure.
That would be fantastic. It takes BIA a long time.
Yeah. And Thune's office has heard that from many of the tribes in their state. So I think that's, and across the country, as we've all heard. We've heard it's different in different regions, of course. I'm sure, staff in different BIA offices can maybe treat this issue a little bit differently or better in some areas, but it's been an issue across the board that we've seen. So this bill would try to address that for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, introduced January 25th, expect to be included probably in an early markup for that committee. Another tribal housing bill, HUD-VASH. This bill was introduced as a standalone in December or late November of last year. But this is a bill that we've seen included in all of our NAIHC versions for the number of years. I have reached out to Tester's office, and I'm sure with his position as chairing the VA committee and his work, bipartisan work with many members of that committee, this was probably something they'll reintroduce earlier this Congress than they did last Congress, but I haven't got a confirmation on that from them. But again, this HUD-VASH bill would make that program permanent, provide a mechanism for all tribes to start receiving some HUD-VASH funding to help veterans in their communities. Right now, it's still limited to the 25 to 30 tribes who have been practicing that program under a demonstration project. So hopefully get a little bit more of an update on that one by the next call as well to see if that's going to be introduced as a standalone. But again, it's always been included in our NAIHC packages as well. One other bill here, Native American Rural Homeownership Improvement Act. This is a bill from last Congress. I had a companion piece on both the House and Senate, so definitely bipartisan support in both chambers. So that's always great to see. I haven't seen any updates on it. I saw Joanna just pop up on the screen already. Maybe she's got some updates on this one. But this is the bill that would really make permanent the CDFI program with USDA single family home, relending it through native CDFIs to really get those loans deployed, mortgages deployed on the ground in local communities. I put there at the very bottom, likely target of a farm bill type provision, but I'm sure we're going to be working on this bill as a standalone as well, in both the appropriation side and just an authorization bill. But anything you want to add real quick, Joanna?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Just two things. One is that in appropriations last year, there was $7.5 million set aside for to extend the pilot, and under the way that it's being operated now is our assumption. And the language in the appropriations bill made it sound like it would be open to places other than South Dakota. So, I mean, it said, like one of the report language said, especially in the Southwest. So probably a senator put that in there from the Southwest. So that's available. So that's a major victory for continuing this ability for certified native CDFIs to borrow capital from USDA and relend to eligible 502 borrowers in their communities. So that was the first thing. So that's available now. And the second thing is, as you said on your slide, this would likely be in the Farm Bill, and both the co-sponsors, Senator Rounds and Senator Smith, the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition, we've been in contact with both of their offices, and they're going to take the existing 2092 language and maybe tweak it a bit, update it, because that's like 2 or 3 years old, that language, or at least 2 years old, and update it based on what's happening in the field now. And so if folks who have, thanks to all the NAIHC members on the call and others who have reached out to their members, and their senators and congressmen to be co-sponsors. If you've looked at the bill and have feedback on language, definitely let us know, because now's the time, and the window's open, but it won't be open for long. So that's the update on 2092.
Great, thank you. And that'll certainly be a topic that I'm sure we're going to hear about at our conference as well. But stay up on video. I'm going to ask you to talk about the next one as well. You guys are doing great work. Of course, South Dakota Homeownership Coalition has been leading these two efforts on that bill, the USDA bill, and the one you see on the screen now, the Native American Direct Loan Improvement Act. I saw it was introduced already, and you've already been sending us a bunch of notes about it, Joanna. And I think they were trying to get it in a hearing this week, but as I mentioned, with their slow start, it sounds like it's getting pushed off. But another great bill to improve another tribal housing program, not at HUD, but this time at the VA.
Yeah, this bill would do, in addition to creating a relending product similar to the one that we just talked about for the NADL program, it helps to streamline. It allows the VA product to refinance. It holds the VA more accountable for implementing this program. And it unfortunately, the language that was introduced doesn't include grants anymore, because VA didn't want to have a program for grants. Instead, they're talking about deeper collaborations without funding, but they're acknowledging the importance of collaborating between VA loan officers and the local practitioners and the TDATs. But the news here in terms of this bill is that, as you said, like with the SKIA bill, like with Senator Thune's bill, this was something that almost made it through last year, and they want they have a SVAC, the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee has a package of end of the year bills that they'd like to get through the beginning of this Congress. But what we're hearing is that there's still language that is, it'll be marked up if all goes well on February 16th in the SVAC committee, and then be hotlined as they tried to do last year. But there's already some concern. They're trying to make sure that the senators that held it last year, one is retired, Senator Toomey is retired, but the new ranking senator on the banking committee, his staff also has the same concerns. So we're still trying to sort through some of those issues, and so that it can move through quickly, because it's, other than those provisions, isn't really controversial at all. And they've got it lined up between the Senate and the House. Even if the House has, as you said, is now new party control. The four, like, there's agreement on this going through, and so we're hopeful that this will pass early this Congress. So we'll keep you posted. But at this point, I don't think it's an issue of, not necessarily an issue of getting more co-sponsors, but if it does come to that, we'll definitely keep everyone posted from NAIHC.
Great updates. Typically, when you have the chair and ranking member of a committee as the two lead sponsors, co-sponsors aren't as important at that point, but it always helps.
Yeah.
Supports, and You mentioned the issues remaining. A lot of times the staff kind of get picked up by the incoming chairs or ranking members. So I think it's probably some staff level discussions there, of course. So if we need help, meeting with them, we did meet with Senate Banking as part of our meetings last week as well, with Senator Scott's staffers that they're bringing on, building a new team, but a lot of times they will have some folks stay over kind of for that consistency and experience. But sometimes that does mean if they had issues before, those issues may still be present in the new.
Yeah, that would be super helpful, Tony, to coordinate with you on that since you guys met with them, because it doesn't sound like it's gone to the Senator Scott level. It's still on the staff level, as you as you mentioned.
Okay, well, I think those are the updates for the bills that we've seen. I'll stop here before we go into kind of the appropriations and budget type discussions and see if there's any questions or comments here, or any other types of ideas that we need to be talking about. I know we've talked about priorities over the last several years, a lot of it being language we've seen in various versions of NAIHC, things like 184, things like access to voucher programs. Again, we'll talk about housing counseling coming up, but if there's anything else here, feel free to drop a note in the chat just to mention it. If it's something we need to start looking up again, or focusing or adding to our advocacy documents that we're going to be providing as part of the March conference, and a lot of the talking points that we create, or feel free to jump in the discussion here. There is a question there about, has that Rural Homeownership Improvement Act been introduced? I don't think it's been reintroduced yet, and I think it probably would be reintroduced as a standalone and probably as language, hopefully to be added either as an amendment or getting into the base farm bill packages that we go. But I don't think anything has been introduced quite yet. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, though.
No, you're right, Tony. And they may not even do a standalone. It may just be a title of the farm bill.
Gotcha. Yeah, great. Well, let's jump into some of the budget and appropriations discussions that we've had. I think this is a holdover slide that a lot of people are familiar with. Of course, full year funding did pass as part of that omnibus package right before Christmas. Small increase for tribal housing programs, about 2% increase for the IHBG formula fund up to 787. So that's kind of the top number NAIHC has been funded at since it's been created. I think someone who was speaking with HUD ONAP said some of those allocations should be coming out this month as they get within their 60-day timeline that they're supposed to have after appropriations are passed to get the new allocations out to you all. But you should be seeing kind of a 2% jump. Saw a small increase in the Indian Community Development Block Grant as well, increasing that up to $75 million. So that's the FY23, that's the current funding levels that we've seen. So it's good to see these kind of smaller increases. There were definitely some years over the last 20 years where we weren't seeing any increases at all. But that's been the problem. With those years that we weren't seeing any increases at all, means that your programs are still well below kind of your NAIHC original funding levels, right? So even though we've seen some increases the last couple of years, you're still kind of way behind. Tribal communities are way behind where they were when NAIHC was first passed. And in those same years, we've seen the HUD budget continue to grow. We've been doing some new charts that we're passing around to folks on the Hill, and that we'll have for all of you when you come to DC in the next month, and we'll make those available online so you can share with any conversations you have with your members. But just showing the growth of NAIHC funding versus tenant-based rental assistance vouchers or the larger voucher program, HUD as a whole. You can see those curves going growing much faster and higher than our NAIHC funding is going. That's almost a flat line compared to what you see some of these other programs. I mean, the main talking point for Section 8 vouchers is it's nearly tripled or has tripled in the last 20 years, whereas our NAIHC dollars have largely been stagnant. So really just having those discussions, really making that a key portion of our talking points and advocacy work that we do. It's why we met with OMB, and we'll continue with the appropriations folks on the Hill as this coming appropriation cycle begins. And really just highlighting the need for more investment and resources for your community and your programs. And that would go to Francisco's point as well. Certainly doesn't answer all the issues with NAIHC, but if everyone's getting more funding, there's certainly going to be a better outcome for your communities and your housing programs. So we'll definitely be highlighting those discrepancies between tribal housing and HUD funding in these next few weeks and all of our documentations that we're providing to the Hill. Another slide just on the FY23, just showing you the full numbers. So competitive grants kind of staying the same, ICBG bumping up a little bit, training TA staying the same. We did get some more funds for the 184 loan guarantee program, and HUD-VASH as well got a small bump as well. So, but you can see how we've got just a 20 million or so increase for our tribal housing programs. So 2% or so. You can see the larger full HUD budget grew even more than that just this past year alone. So even this past year, we're losing ground with the larger HUD budget as well. So trying to make sure we're having the right conversations to turn that tide, so to speak, and not necessarily to take anything away from public housing, but to make sure that we're adequately and properly investing in tribal communities alongside that. And I'll jump to the end of this slide, and the key for optimism here in this particular cycle are the positions of our kind of tribal allies in Congress. So Senator Schatz has been the chair for THUD appropriations on the Senate side. So I think that's why we've seen a couple gains in the last few years, and certainly Hawaiian Block Grant has seen some gains as well. But on the House side in particular, Representative Tom Cole, member of the Choctaw Nation, has moved over to the THUD appropriations chair on the House side. He'd been at Labor H for a number of years and really had helped IHS receive some funding increases as well over that time period. So we're hopeful and excited that that trend might continue on the transportation and particularly the housing front. Of course, in this coming cycle, we met with his office and staff, and they're already looking into that, of course, and they were already kind of ahead of us even on ideas that they're having on all the programs that they're looking for in the THUD appropriations bills and where they can make some improvements for tribal programs. So it was great to meet with them and see that they're already, on task with that and looking to see where they can make those recommendations and improvements for tribal programs. But for the larger 24 process, usually you start that with the president's budget request, sometimes released in February. I think we're hearing won't be released until March. We did meet with the tribal liaison at OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, that produces the president's budget. And one of the key takeaways there, of course, outside of the HUD context of just wanting to see more parity and funding for tribal and housing programs, but really trying to prop up their work at the OMB, trying to create some permanence to tribal staffing and program experience in the OMB. This was a new position as a tribal liaison, but it's still a position of one. I think some of the discussions there, we're trying to see how they can make that position and even try to create a team moving forward to really make sure future budgets and future administrations are properly taking into account tribal issues and priorities. So after the budget gets released in the springtime, which should be around the time that we are convening in DC ourselves as a group and with the Hill, you start to see Congress then taking that budget, really holding a lot of hearings, listening sessions, getting letters and recommendations on the appropriations process as they kind of go through and write the bills, put numbers on paper, and divvy up the full kind of funding for the federal government into the various programs. So that happens over the spring and the summer. Of course, it's supposed to get done by September 30th. We haven't seen that in almost 20 years or so. And then you start getting into continuing resolutions or full year spending packages like we saw at the end of 2022. So that's the normal process for appropriations. Moving our conference back up to the spring will definitely help us and members of Congress get that awareness that tribal programs continue to be underfunded, under-resourced in the housing context. So definitely a big plus moving this back up our conference and getting all of you back into DC earlier in the process in the springtime, unlike last fall. And that was really just because of the COVID pandemic that we had pushed that conference to the fall, but it should be returning to the spring for this year and for future years, I believe. So that's kind of the budget process that we see. I think we've talked about this kind of over the call so far, just the strategy, continue pushing for NAIHC and more resources, moving our event back to the spring. I'll be certainly reaching out to regional housing groups more as we get into these next couple months, just to learn some of the kind of regional issues that we see, and getting kind of more letter writing campaigns from the regional level, really just kind of spamming the Hill, right? I think, they say they hear from us as an organization, but they don't always hear from individual tribes within their states and districts. So really just trying to improve our mechanisms that we have at NAIHC to get you all engaged and make it easier for you all in your programs to be engaged, whether it's co-signing a letter, adding your name to a letter. We have our kind of informal mail your delegate or your congressional delegation platform, and we'll continue to use that, but also trying to create some more formal structures of getting either your housing programs, letterhead or more formal sign-on type documentation for folks on the Hill to really see how big an issue or how big of importance this really is, and you wouldn't be able to use it as an excuse that you're just not hearing enough from their individual tribes in their community. So that's why we hope to increase that engagement at the regional level as well, and increase coordination with NCAI. I know they have their event coming up in February as well. I've met with Ryan and their housing person, CC Wright, already once or twice this year. We'll continue those conversations to see how we can engage with their organization and the tribal leader side of things that they're kind of bringing to the table and bringing to DC to make sure we're all, kind of putting together a common front and working from common talking points and strategies here. I mentioned NCI specifically, and I think this is something we're going to try to include at our March conferences. Indian Health Service received advanced appropriations in their advocacy work last year, and that had been an issue that was 10 years coming, so to speak. This is an issue, advanced appropriations, where they're trying to get federal funding approved for the Indian Health Service a whole year ahead of time. So they're not caught up in these continuing resolutions and possible government shutdowns, because that would impact the Indian Health Service, of course, as being a federal program. But advanced appropriations should alleviate those issues for them, so they can at least continue to provide the healthcare that's so vital in these communities, regardless of what Congress is doing in Washington. So that issue took a long time, and it really had some collaboration between NCI and the National Indian Health Board and the QE, Council for Urban Indian Organizations, are all coming together towards the end of last year. So trying to duplicate that process that they used for that issue, and really bring that to NAIHC as well. This is our 10th year that NAIHC has been expired. So trying to use it as a milestone and talking point to say that this is kind of the next important issue. It's always been important, of course, but that this is kind of on the forefront now of tribal issues that really need to be addressed by Congress this year. So it's kind of some discussion on the overall strategies that you'll be hearing about on these calls and at our event next year. I'll keep going because I know we're already getting a little short on time to go through some of these other topics, but feel free to say something in the chat or interrupt me if you need to. Current HUD and ONAP grants, I don't think there's any open grants at the moment. I could be mistaken if something's come out in the last week or so. Indian Community Development Block, these are FY22 grants, so last year's funding. Both of those NOFOs have come and gone. The IHBG competitive grant period ended January 24th. Hopeful to hear some turnaround on the award notifications for both the ICDBG, that was a deadline in October, and the IHBG competitive moving forward in the next couple of months or weeks, hopefully, for the ICDBG. So those are the current grants, FY23. Now that's been fully approved by Congress. We're hopeful that HUD can turn those around pretty quickly. I think this is almost kind of one of the first times I felt like they've been caught up in their grant cycles. I know over the past few years, they were delayed partly because of COVID issues and the extra COVID grants that they were managing and putting NOFAs out for, but it feels like they're almost caught up to some degree. FY22 just wrapping up this past month is a little late, but I think it's probably been as timely as we've seen. So hopefully that trend continues as well and continues to get better. For comment periods, open comment periods that we've seen published in the Federal Register or for other types of comment requests. The big one is HUD 184, Loan Guarantee Proposed Rule, published in the Federal Register in December, deadline of March 17th for folks to submit comments about in the public comment period and the structured comment period for that proposed rule. They're also, HUD ONAP is also hosting several consultations, both at the regional level and the national level. Many of them, a couple have already happened, I believe, and some are happening this month. And then we will have a proposed rule consultation as part of our NAIHC legislative conference that first week of March, leading up to that deadline. NAIHC is going to type up some comments, trying to get some feedback from the regional consultations as well. But we'll try to publish that with at least a week or two in advance, or probably around our conference, so folks can see that and use it as either a template or a starting off point for them to modify their own comments or submit comments of their own as part of that process. Another one that we've seen is this HUD Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program request for information. This isn't as formal a process, but HUD has asked tribes to receive for information on how they can improve the CDBG disaster recovery program. So this isn't the Indian Community Development Block Grant. This is a larger community development block grant that's got a disaster recovery component that's open nationwide, but few tribes, I need to update that. I don't think it's no tribes. Some tribes have accessed this recently, but few tribes have been accessing this pot of funding, and HUD has asked for information on how they can improve it generally moving forward. And that deadline is later this month in February, now that we're in February. Another rule that I've just seen published in the last week, HUD Office of Housing Counseling, they did publish their Tribal Housing Counseling Certification Rule on January 26th, so last week. Comment periods are due March 27th. I haven't had a chance to look at the rule quite yet. We'll definitely do so ahead of our conference coming up in March, and obviously before that, but try to get some feedback and general consensus on where that rule is heading. I have sat on the Federal Advisory Committee for the Office of Housing Counseling, so I've been part of their public meetings, and I know this one will be discussed as part of their next public Federal Advisory Committee meeting. I know some others on these calls and on our tribal calls have been engaged in that process as well. And I know we had a lot of tribal feedback on their proposals. I think even way back in 2021, where they were holding some listening sessions about this rule and these proposed ideas on how to incorporate tribal programs into the larger housing counseling structure. So I don't know quite off the top of my head, because I haven't taken a look into the rule quite yet, how well they've come out in the end after those tribal discussions. If anyone has taken a look or has kind of some initial thoughts, happy to have that discussion here today, or we can jump on a call at any time after this just to discuss a little bit more, but we'll definitely be putting more information out about this rule moving forward. I do believe they've said they're going to also conduct some tribal consultation on this outside of the formal Federal Register publication and comment period, but we'll see if that happens. And I don't think I've seen a schedule of that yet, but it's something we'll be talking with the Office of Housing Counseling as this process moves forward. But again, that's a proposed rule for tribal housing counseling certification. So I'll stop there because the next couple of slides are about Treasury programs. Any questions about any HUD programs or issues? All right, let's keep going. We can always open up for questions at the end. Emergency rental assistance, don't have the best news for this program. As many of you know, the funds were expired on September 30th for a lot of tribes. Some tribes had a 3-month extension going to December 29th. This was to expend their emergency rental assistance funds that they received under some of the COVID packages. And we do know that a good, I would say a majority of tribes who received funds didn't spend all of their ERA funding for various reasons. And that we've been having an effort to really try to get them more time to do so and extend the time period for emergency rental assistance funding moving forward. There's been a group of tribes and us on kind of weekly calls here in DC trying to strategize around this, and it's been kind of difficult in this first month of the new Congress really to see where that vehicle would be to extend this program for a year is what we've been asking for. We were close again to getting this in the omnibus package. I think it was Senator Toomey and some others that were limiting what could get into the final omnibus package in particular. So ERA extension did not get into that package, and I write in it's a long shot because I feel like it is, in the sense that there's not a lot of expectation of bills to get past this Congress in the next month or two. And as we get further and further from these funds expiring, it's going to be a much bigger challenge to convince members of Congress that these funds are already paid for, that they're not going back to Treasury, things like that. So it's tough to finding that vehicle that this provisions could get passed. And then particularly in the environment that you see, we've seen the debt ceiling and a lot of news as well. So when you have that kind of as a conservative talking point about curtailing spending, this is a prime example of where funds were appropriated, and when they weren't used, are we going to bring those back to the Treasury, or let them really get spent down? So it's been a big talking back and forth on this. Some of the same issues with Senate banking on the minority side in particular there, just on the impact of these programs. They were looking for data on, are we tying rental assistance to COVID impacts still at this point? When, for a lot of communities and states, COVID programs are starting to wind down, except for the state's ERA program. But those have been some of the discussions we've had on the Hill. And I know this past week, even the federal government, I think President Biden put out some news saying a lot of federal declarations about COVID will be winding down this spring or in May. So it'll be harder and harder as we go forward in time to really be advocating for these funds to stay for COVID rental assistance purposes. But we'll continue to have these discussions and certainly be checking in with the tribes who've been engaged on this in these first few weeks as we go forward. But I'll jump to the HAF program real quick, but happy to open up any conversation about ERA or these Treasury programs. For the Homeowner Assistance Fund, we'll be turning more attention back to this one. It's kind of flown under the radar just based on the time sensitivity of ERA. But we have heard from Treasury that a lot of tribes still have not submitted their HAF plan. So I certainly want to reiterate to any of you on the call today, if you haven't submitted your HAF plan to Treasury, they're looking for tribes to do that, or they're going to start asking if tribes want to give up their allocation that they claim so they can reallocate it to other tribes who are operating HAF programs. One, I want to make clear, NAIHC can help with this. So we do have some funds available at NAIHC to help with training and TA on crafting and submitting your HAF plan. So if you need any assistance with that, certainly reach out to us at NAIHC and let us know. We can do that. But we've also heard an issue from Treasury that the longer these funds sit waiting for tribes to submit their plans, it's really just setting, in a line item on a piece of paper that's looking like it's unobligated, funds in the federal government. So when you're in this climate of, curtailing spending again, anytime you have program dollars that are seeming to be sitting there waiting to get used, it's giving fodder to groups, conservative groups in particular, who are wanting to cut funding. So certainly want to make sure the tribes who have their allocations of the HAF program are able to access those. And if they need to submit plans, we're here to help do that. You can check the link that's on the screen. We'll be including some more information on our newsletters moving forward to make sure you're aware of the services that we can help provide on the HAF side of things. So I think that's really it for the updates. Sorry, it's just been me going the whole hour. Folks can jump in. Any questions though before we move just to the last couple slides, which are more about our events coming up, just to give you guys some idea of what to expect over the next few weeks. Any comments or questions real quick?
Hi, Tony. This is Thomas.
Hi, Thomas.
Thank you for doing a great report and informing the community on the importance of everything that's happening in Indian country on housing and on the Hill. I just want to encourage the tribal leaders and the tribal members and the housing representatives and directors and such to continue to submit letters explaining the importance of having ERA funded and continued. And, as Tony mentioned earlier, it did look a little bleak last week when we were on the Hill, but I think if we continue to push in a concerted effort, the importance of extending ERA, anything that we could do, a letter campaign, write your local congressman, your local representative, just want to encourage you to do that. If you guys, I know that the Hill responds to a lot of Twitter accounts. So if any of you all have a Twitter account, hashtag extend ERA. get their attention. And so I just really want to encourage that. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. And like I mentioned, I think a lot of times, after these types of trips or just my general efforts and calls that I make to folks on the Hill, they're hearing from us as an organization. But a lot of times they're also waiting to hear from their own constituents and members of their districts on the House side. So if you do have these issues and you want your member of Congress to work on, certainly reach out as much as you can, both at their state office level, at their federal levels, offices here in DC, as part of that effort. And that kind of segues into this. So hopefully a lot of you on the call are planning to attend our legislative conference next month, March 6th, 7th, and 8th in Washington, DC. We usually get about 150, I think up to 200 sometimes for this conference. Tribal leaders, tribal housing professionals, like all of you, attorneys as well, in DC to really focus on these issues and really highlight these issues. As we get into a new Congress, it's a great time to be educating all the new offices and new members that I've mentioned over the call today. You can see our agenda there. If the little QR code, if you scan that, that'll take you to the registration page. Registration is open. We're going to do an Advocacy 101, the legislative committee, and a reception. Then we have our general sessions and panel discussion and the 184 rule consultation on the Tuesday, and then it's a Hill day. So we'll have a ton of our advocacy documents, the one-pagers, similar to what we were passing out at our fall conference in DC last September. But here you're kind of getting ahead of the curve, so to speak, and getting into these offices just as they're really getting all their priorities lined up. So that the fact that they'll be hearing about NAIHC and tribal housing from you all directly in DC, that's going to go a long way. So hopefully a lot of you can continue to come out to this event and make it to DC just next month. I think we're only 4.5-5 weeks away. So time flies, I know. One thing I wanted to bring up for discussion here, and I'll just look for any thumbs up reactions or anything in the chat. There was a question, and particularly from our board of directors at NAIHC, saying, how can we make this conference as effective as can be? We usually do an Advocacy 101 session as part of the conference, but the question came up, is there some type of Advocacy 101 that we can do a few weeks in advance of the conference to really help all of you understand who the best targets are for meetings and requests? And I think we're happy to put something like that together if people think it's a good idea. I mentioned the slow start to Congress, not even having full committees really, fleshed out in full from subcommittee rosters on both sides of the aisle. We can have that information and put either in a quick webinar or another Zoom call like this, or at least just a packet of information a few weeks out, so you guys know really which offices you need to be reaching out to about scheduling meetings or having conversations with. Happy to put that type of session together. That would happen probably mid-February or the week of that federal holiday week in February. If people think it's a good idea or would like to attend something like that, send us a note or put something in the chat or chime in here. It's something that we would happy to put together if it would be helpful for you all to really know which targets are. All the committees should be well organized by then, and certainly we can have the full rosters of who's the ranking members, who are the chairs on both sides, on the House and the Senate. So I think it'll be a good discussion to have as kind of a pre-conference 101, and then we'll do the on-site 101, which is really about what to say in the meetings, how to use the handouts, how to focus on your own individual communities programs and highlights there. So I think both sessions can be used in conjunction, and happy to put that together. I saw one hands up, so or thumbs up. That's all I needed for validation on that. So we'll try to put something together. You'll see some news about that in our newsletters and emails. But with that, that's kind of the end of the slide deck. We've got 3 minutes left if you want to fill the full hour. If anyone's got any questions or comments. Yeah, Gabrielle.
Real quick question. Are we still having the next legislative conference, call on Thursday, March 2nd, just before the conference in Washington?
I've been thinking about that. We usually do cancel it because of the in-person, but I think it would still be helpful for folks. I know not everyone's coming to DC, so I think we're actually going to try to do both. The normal Thursday call in March, just to make sure everyone's hearing all the updates, and then for those on site, you might hear it again, but it'll be for those on site, it'll be more updates as well. So I think we'll probably do both.
And do you know when you will have the annual conference information out? You know, prices have shot up, so it would be nice to get a budgetary idea of how much each attendee would fit into the budget.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. Sorry, I didn't have this information on the slide. I think our website has a save the date, at least it's in May 8, 9,
Yeah.
10, and 11. I'll make sure we put up some generic information. We're going to try to have registration open either by the end of this week or probably next week. Yeah, today's Thursday, so next week. Next week, hoping to open up registration. Cost should be the same. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but registration fees from last year should carry over. If you know
Right,
what
I not so much the registration fee as you have it in a huge hotel complex,
oh yeah,
and we're not talking the less expensive on the scale. So, you know, flights, hotel, it would be nice to have a little bit more information so we could say, yeah, we can only send 2 people, or, you know, we can maybe stretch it to 3. Because everything has gone up. I mean, like the hotel for this conference is $100 more than it was in the fall. Flights are $500 more each than it was in the fall.
Yeah.
So, you know, it would be nice to have that. And last question is, I have been trying for weeks now to find any information how to nominate someone for the Virginia Kaiser Award. There's nothing on your website there. I mean, the only thing I can find is the awardees from last year. Is there any? I left a couple of messages, but nobody's gotten back to me. Is there anyone I can contact?
well, first, sorry to hear that. If you've left some messages, typically we put that out as a solicitation in kind of a formal time frame that we'll open it up and then have it closed. Since we've been planning this legislative conference, we haven't gotten quite into the weeds of the annual convention yet. One, I'll make sure we got more of the hotel and pricing information up sooner rather than later. I see a few people in the chat echoing your question there, so thank you for bringing it up. We'll definitely be adding that on and sending it out in the next newsletter if we can. But for those award nominations, same thing. It'll be in the emails coming out soon. I know the board of directors has a meeting coming up next week, I think, or week after in February. So definitely get some guidance on there, but we'll definitely be putting out those award nomination forms and surveys probably this month, and then having them open for, you know, a month or more.
Yeah, I had a tickler on my calendar that this is about the time of year.
Yeah.
So I've been trying since December to get more information.
Great.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for those questions. Good questions there. Anything else from the group? Okay. Well, like I said, we'll try to get more of the annual convention stuff out sooner rather than later. And then feel free to reach out to us and we will get back to you on any questions like that. So if there's been any delays there. Anything else for the group? Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. Have a great rest of your afternoon or morning, and have a great weekend. We'll see everyone soon, and hopefully you're all coming out to DC, and I'll see you guys next month in March in Washington. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.